consciousness is comprised of at least one of two things: qualia and what I will term thought. Qualia are the sensory data that come to conscious perception. Thought I will define as conscious choice within the context of contemporaneous perceptions of the world. These are roughly analogous to determined and free will, respectively, as defined in previous videos. Determinism holds that consciousness is only qualia. This is easily demonstrated, as anything we would generally consider thought becomes reducible to deterministic interactions of qualia with a given conscious state. This is to distinguish thinking from processing. Even memory becomes qualia, in another addition to the classical five senses, already rendered incomplete by the standards of modern physiological science. This view is quite tenable, but only under certain additional conditions. In a reductionist materialist view, consciousness is an emergent property of particular arrangements of matter. It becomes incoherent, however, if this consciousness arises from nothing, being particular to humans, say, or only beings with brains. This would leave no grounding for why consciousness appears at all, given the lack of sharp boundaries between, and the gradual evolution of, these neural and physical structures. Though its forms, classes, and identities may change, elements of consciousness must be present in its constituents. This inevitably leads to all structures, arbitrary structures, and importantly, overlapping structures, having some form of consciousness. If we want to identify discrete conscious entities, and it seems to me that our experience of conscious self points that way, then what we consider to be conscious entities or consciousnesses are distinct from and arbitrary functions of the continuous flow of consciousness. We might say in this view simply physical structures and interactions within a material universe. These entities then are not necessary to the causality of the universe, but merely lone observers of the domain of their own total experience. This is, perhaps somewhat ironically, a type of functional solipsism. This may not be untenable, but I find it extremely unsatisfying. It is the positing of an infinite multitude of other conscious entities, but ones that can never be interacted with, unless your consciousness is some special unity that somehow cannot be integrated with the continuum. That last unless would be the full dive into actual solipsism, with the abandonment of prior axioms of consciousness. That one's own consciousness could be different from and more real than others' consciousness is self-evident, because it is the experience of the self, others' consciousness not being so. This could well mean that one self's consciousness is the only reality. It opens the door to the possibility of that most extreme position, by no means characteristic of all versions of solipsism, that consciousness is only thought. In light of one's own experience of pain and suffering, and the apparent inability to vanish it, indeed, the apparent inability to shape the whole cosmos to one's whims, such conscious choice seemingly cannot be wholly free. Is it random, then? The phenomena, the patterns of experience, say otherwise, unless information is far more malleable than we have reason to justify, certainly without freedom to shape its interpretation. A randomness-freedom composition may be tenable, yet I find the lack of natural law, cause and effect, ultimately unsatisfying. The most broadly useful justification for consciousness is that it exists in itself, grounded by a self-existent axiom. This provides reasonably satisfying grounding for all three compositional explanations of consciousness, where they are not rendered unsatisfying or untenable for other reasons. That it precludes reductionistic emergence, however, only means that a more sophisticated materialism should transcend it. consciousness is matter, of a certain kind. I propose that it is the driving force behind the ordering of complex structure in the universe, especially life. This does not require one to put away one's deterministic views, if one is so inclined, but I believe that free, conscious choice played a part in even the most primal beginnings of our development. Consciousness is comprised of both qualia and thought. I look forward to your comments, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Cold Open, signing out.